SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CEOs and CMOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Dan Miles, Chief Operating Officer at TVEyes, an information service that provides online real-time search and indexing for television and radio broadcasts and audio and video search infrastructure for search engines. Hey, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ken. It's great to be here. I'm honored that you invited me to join the podcast and gave me this opportunity to talk about TVEyes, which is something I really love talking about, very passionate about.
Well, I'm happy to have you here too. And this will not be one of our usual save the world conversations. We're going to have to keep it focused to how do people like you grow their businesses and overcome obstacles. But before we get into that, would you do us a favor and tell us just a little bit more about yourself and your company, TVEyes?
Sure. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit, start at the most recent, move backwards a little bit. But I joined TVEyes 10 years ago. I was really fortunate to meet the company's founder, David Ives, who 20 years ago started the company from nothing. And that is such a feat for somebody to start a successful business from nothing. And so I met David via networking. I had left Cablevision before then and was just really lucky to meet David because it was the right professional situation for me in the sense that David was looking for somebody to come on board and help him run the business. And at that time, we were probably a third of the size that we are now. Before I met David, I had spent some time at Cablevision. I was at Cablevision for about 7 years, and I started Optimum Wi-Fi service. And I think helped make Wi-Fi ubiquitous in the country, because as part of that, I worked with all the other cable operators and built the wireless business, the Wi-Fi business for Cablevision. But early in my career, I started as a banker. And I worked in Latin American commercial and investment banking for the first 10 years. And so I've had a very diverse career, but I think one that's given me a lot of different perspectives and way to look at business and has been very beneficial as I've moved forward in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. We don't meet too many, people running SaaS or information services businesses like yours that have that kind of finance, operating, and then into the mix background. So it's a very cool background, probably very useful for where the business is today. I think it would be good also to tell people a little bit about TVEyes. I mean, I think the description I read is accurate, but a little color commentary might be good there.
Yeah, would be happy to share that. And I think you did a good job because when people ask me, well, what is TVEyes? I think the most easy, obvious way to understand the business is that we are a search engine in a sense for what I would call impactful video and audio. And impactful I measure by audience and also its level of information and newsworthiness. Historically, that has been focused on broadcast, TV, and radio. But over the last few years, as audiences migrate to online platforms like podcasts and streaming video, we too are moving in that direction. And so TVEyes has, we captured the data, we have the software platform to process it, and then we have a user interface to expose it to folks. And the nice thing about our platform is it works for all video and audio. And video and audio are very powerful mediums. Where you get your video and audio certainly will evolve over time, but the fact that people love video and audio is, I think, undebatable. that they're always going to want to experience information and experience the world, so to speak, through video and audio.
So this business, you're helping folks to surface that content, right?
That's right. That's right. To search for things that are important for them to know and to keep track of what's being said, certainly in the news and in podcasts and things of that sort. So to give you a sense of kind of how big TVEyes is, right now we capture over 3,000 broadcast and radio stations. So every day we're processing a couple of million hours of content. And we're doing that in 27 countries and in 35 different languages. And then we're also capturing about 50,000 podcasts, which translates into about 120,000 hours a month of podcast content. And so our platform allows folks to search that content and to find things that are important to them or of interest to them.
Awesome. And I think to make sure people understand that what actually happens here is it's searching within the spoken word.
That's right.
As this is indexed on the spoken word, not the metadata. So this is really a very deep search capability.
Yes. Yes. Good point. It's spoken word. And I know, hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about AI later in the episode, because AI will open up other avenues of discovery for that content and for that video and audio.
Absolutely.
But to do what we do is not easy. It's a really heavy lift because we have to go out and get those data streams. And in the broadcast world, you have to be in market, so to speak, to do that, because video signals especially only travel so far, especially local video signals, local news. And that's by design in the US for sure. And in some other countries it is. So where possible, we've got, I think, 300 capture locations around the world to ingest and to get these video streams so that we can then index them and make them searchable.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that as really the moat for TVEyes, right? The capture and the storage and indexing of the content is kind of one hurdle, but perhaps not insurmountable. But the idea of having 300 plus capture stations in 27 countries requires a level of commitment that creates a moat. And I think a lot of pure software plays don't have that opportunity.
Right. No, we're really a combination of a SaaS, but also a data company, because we are going out to get all of this content such that we can serve it up on our SaaS platform. And obviously we add bells and whistles to the platform in terms of alerts or reporting on it and things of that sort, metadata to make it pop in terms of its value as earned media versus it's different than bought media like advertising, right? This is earned influencing media. But so we've got the SaaS piece, but then, because we have to go out and get this content, we've created a data set as well underlying that SaaS platform.
Yeah, that's really cool. And, there's a lot of businesses that I think are not necessarily, as you are at the core, a data business, that they're generating a ton of data and don't realize that it could also be monetized and create for themselves revenue that is much easier to protect. It's very hard to protect, my software does this when you click a mouse. It's easy for people to fast follow you if you're the innovator. But if you have stuff that is only available through you, data or inferred data, that can be really powerful. And I think that's also an area of opportunity for AI, right? AI is going to start creating what I call manufacturing data that wasn't there in the past. Before we dig into that stuff, though, I want to talk about, and you alluded to this ever so slightly, that part of your business is selling your data to others.
Yep.
But I think that it's not just that you're selling the data, but these companies are much bigger, and they're also your competitors. So they're your clients and your competitors. And I think that's worthy of kind of exploring a little bit how you navigate those waters.
Sure. So TVEyes, at this point, we have really two sources of revenue. One is the direct SaaS platform. People pay us a subscription to get access to our platform and the data that bubbles up or feeds through that based on their search criteria. But over the last 10 years or so, one of the big areas of growth for us has been wholesaling our services and our data to bigger companies who, because it's a heavy lift, don't want to do it themselves. They'd much rather buy it from us. And it's more efficient for them to buy it from us because the more folks we can supply, the lower we can keep the costs for each of them on an individual basis. And so we've been able to monetize our data kind of in two ways, direct and wholesale. And some of the wholesale partners are much bigger than we are. And the advantage to going wholesale for us is we've been able to grow the company very efficiently. So rather than tripling the size of the sales team, we are basically leveraging these partners to sell and expose our services to parts of the market, whether they be international markets or folks that normally wouldn't have looked at us as a standalone service. And so it's paid dividends for the company to do that. One of the reasons we can do that is, again, what we do is very hard, complicated, something they don't want to do themselves. And there aren't many of us that do it. There are very few companies. And so we've kind of become what I'll call the Intel Inside for people in the PR and communications tool space and media monitoring space who aggregated lots of different types of content to look at. What they've done is they've relied on us to be their broadcast and podcast and eventually online video provider.
Well,
And so we've been able to maintain those two businesses without serious cannibalization. And there are some reasons for that, which we can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it must be much less expensive to buy the data from you guys than to field your own capture network, right? Field and manage it and process that information. And especially, I think the firm has shown no appetite to compete as an all-in-one solution for everything a PR or media professional might want to take in.
That's right.
So your standalone SaaS product is really sort of a very straightforward, if you want to know about TV and radio and podcast on an individual basis, this is your tool. And that, I think, also gives permission to these other firms to buy from you, right? Because they know you're not really going at them head to head.
That's right. And so we've stuck to our knitting, and we define our knitting as audio and video. That's what we focus on. And that will lead us to other markets and other mediums, certainly other platforms as eyeballs migrate. But we've stuck to video and audio. And our partners, our wholesale partners, so to speak, know that and trust us. And so while there are times when there's a bit of overlap with the direct side versus the wholesale side, it's very minimal. And the company has benefited greatly from having a wholesale channel as well as the direct channel.
Was the early days of that a difficult time? I mean, was it hard to convince your partners that, this was going to be a good decision for them?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a lot of options. And we were upfront that we were not looking to get into their business in the sense of, trying to be like them or compete like them. And so, no, I think they trusted us from that standpoint. They understood that we were sticking to our knitting. I think the trust comes into, well, can you deliver? It's the quality of service, the quality of your capture network, your ability to supply us the data via APIs. How solid are you on that sense? But I think philosophically, they understood that we were going to stay in our sandbox and that we were going to allow them to do what they do. We like the market we're in, and they like the market they're in, and that's great. So it was more about, well, can you deliver? Can you build a country? If we want to move into Japan or Singapore, can you put capture networks in those markets and supply us efficiently? And can we take your API and plug it into our backend and populate our platforms? And they have, obviously, over time. We've had partners for 10 years, and we've grown really nicely with some of those, many of those partners. And we were adding partners, to this day, because we're now kind of recognized as the go-to solution when it comes to that piece of their service.
So we've been talking about the wholesale side of the business. And one of my questions really is, pricing for SaaS is pretty well understood. And there's lots of resource for folks that want to do end user SaaS pricing. But how do you go about pricing a wholesale data feed? Like, what are the inputs to that? Because I think the inputs to the end user kinds of products are easier to research. But if you want to get into the data business with your company, there's not a real roadmap there.
No, there isn't. I mean, we used our retail rate our average retail rate was a bit of a benchmark. And so what we found is, most of the contracts have been done on a variable basis. So they're paying us each time they sell our services into their platform, which is a great economic model if you've got big partners who are growing. So in that case, what we did is we would take our retail rate and say, okay, we'll give it to you for less than we sell retail, because we know you're going to make it up in volume, and because they're not allowed to sell us as a standalone. So we have to be bundled in with their other services. And so that makes a lot of sense for both of us to do it that way. When we get into international markets where we do not have direct sales, if you were to buy TVEyes in Germany, you're buying it via one of our partners. We haven't built a German sales team, so to speak. So in that case, it becomes, okay, well, if you want us to build Germany, but this is the initial partner. We have multiple partners in Germany now, which is great. But when we initially went in there, we said, all right, let us look at what it's going to cost us to build and what it's going to cost us to operate the network there. And then let's talk about how many sales you think you can make. And then we'll come up with a price that meets, both of our needs in terms of us, TVEyes, getting an ROI and a fairly quick return on investment, and the partner having a competitive product to sell.
So it's a real dialogue in cases where
it's very much a dialogue. Yeah. Yeah. And I think what many of our partners appreciate about us is that they can come to us and say, we had a partner come to us recently and say, hey, we want to be in Brazil. Will you guys build in Brazil? And so now we've added Brazilian content streams to our data set.
That's very cool. There's also other uses for this data, right? So there's the people that want to make something else out of it, whether that's financial or other. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So historically, our customers have been kind of in two pools. One is PR and communications professionals who want to keep track of what's being said. And those folks can be in a PR agency, they could be at a major corporation, they could be at a local police department. Because again, we're capturing in the US, we're capturing all of the local broadcasts, many of the local broadcasts in all of the local markets. And so if you're a police department in Spokane, Washington, right, and you want to know how things are being reported on in the news, whether you have a case or whatnot, you would sign up and use us. So that's kind of the PR and communications use case, anything from local to multinational, nonprofit, political, government, etc. The other historical customer base we've had are media and journalists, folks who are watching the news, both to learn what's going on, but also to study the media and to be able to contrast coverage between different channels and different outlets. And so those historically had been our two customer bases. But as people realize kind of the data set that we have, we're now starting to move into more research customers who are looking for maybe not video, maybe they just want the transcripts, but they want 5 years of transcripts because they want to, we have one professor, for instance, who is studying the media and politics in the US. And so what they're looking for is kind of local news and national news coverage of politicians, and then on the news, and then what the impact of that is in terms of the election and coverage and public opinion and all that stuff. And so this data set we have can be monetized very differently from where it has been historically. And then you can certainly get into trend analysis, and you could also get into things like, hey, what are the Detroit stations saying about the car strike, the auto strike, the UAW strike? And that's a company town. Like, those newscasters really understand the auto business and the UAW. So if I'm a trader or I'm a research analyst and I want to know what's being said locally, because those folks may have inside knowledge that I don't, then this is a great source of new, unique information. Another classic case would be, refineries in Houston, right? The Houston local news will cover the refineries. They'll know if a refinery's got an outage for a few days. They'll report on that. But that won't necessarily make it all the way to Reuters or Bloomberg or any of the other big news lines, so to speak. And so it gives somebody a bit of an edge, if they have access to that local news and that local content, even on Wall Street.
That's amazing. I think this is a good time. We're talking about longitudinal, very large data sets. Yeah. I think we need to talk about what you imagine and are working toward in terms of AI against this data set. The ability of machine learning AI models to create context out of near limitless data like the internet is, I think, entering the public understanding and imagination. But your data set's pretty darn gigantic as well. And I'm sort of wondering what you think the future is for using that kind of technology against the TVEyes data set. And again, I think if we can talk about that from the standpoint of what other people putting on a product management hat also would be thinking about or should be thinking about.
So, I mean, when I think of AI, there are two areas where it's really going to impact TVEyes. I mean, one area you're talking about, we need to spend some time on that. And then the other one is just usability for our regular customers and making their life easier in terms of being able to search more efficiently and things of that sort. So again, TVEyes has this massive text transcript database going back 12 years for a couple of thousand broadcast stations that we record and capture and index 24/7. So it's a massive database. And AI really allows somebody to go in and mine that data in any number of ways. Before AI, it would be a lot of work to go in and look at terabytes and terabytes of data going back years and mining that and looking for sentiment or being able to take the data from many disparate sources and geographies and put it together by looking not for words, but by looking for summarizing the topic, for instance, right? And doing a topical analysis versus a word analysis, or cleaning up the transcripts. Transcripts aren't always nice and neat in terms of punctuation and paragraphs. Machines can work with them, but machines can work with them a lot better if they can clean them up, or if they can append other data to those transcripts. So telling the difference between Apple computer and Apple the fruit is something that AI and machine learning is perfect for, right? Because it can read the context and say, oh no, that's Apple the company. Oh, let me go get Apple's ticker and append that ticker such that we can connect this data to a lot of other data and have a really holistic view of what was being said in the media about Apple and what the stock did and what the analyst said. So there are any number of ways that you can all of a sudden mine the data. You can slice it and dice it many different ways if you have machines doing it for you, especially when you have such a large kind of unique data set.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, especially, talking about the topical summary, and you could probably do that, like track that over 36 months and try and assign some kind of value to the shift
in coverage and how it's being spoken about, for sure. Or in our case, you could go back 10 years. And so you could look at something 10 years ago and look at it today. And you could, instead of searching for terms, you would say, tell me about bridge building. Instead of having to list the Brooklyn Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge, you could just say bridge building and collect all of that data, whether it's being broadcast in Japan or Australia. And then simple things, sentiment, translation. AI will allow us to take Japanese content and convert it to English language very quickly, fairly efficiently, such that an analyst in New York can read what's being reported on in Tokyo almost instantaneously if they're trading Japanese equities or something.
Yeah, I've been looking at, there's an AI dubbing service for video that I've come across, and it does it in your own voice. So not only does it do the translation, but then it does the text to speech in your voice or the voice of the person in the video. So kind of the transmogrification, if that's even a word, is kind of crazy.
Yeah, there was a good documentary about Wilt Chamberlain that was done on Showtime, a little shout out for Showtime. And they used AI to create his voice. Wilt died 20 something years ago, but they were using AI to create his voice to read things that he said in interviews, such that it felt like he was part of the documentary, for instance.
I'd love to talk a little bit about how you manage the business, because you really have the operational responsibility across the entire business. And I'm wondering, from a standpoint of revenue and opportunity development, what are the KPIs that you look at on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? And I know you have both revenue generation and retention kind of work going on there. If you could share a little light on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, every day I look at retention numbers, and on a monthly basis, for sure, I look at inbound versus outbound. And I guess big picture, I'm really focused on revenue generation. That's my top priority. And that's something I learned from David, who bootstrapped the company and said, at the end of the day, do I have enough money to keep the lights on, right? And so I took that to heart, and I really look very closely at revenue generation on the direct side and where the revenues are coming from, whether they're inbound or outbound in terms of sourcing. And then also very closely at retention and what we're retaining at and what the economics look like. And on the partner side, we have a person that kind of runs the partnership business. They're excellent, chief commercial officer, but I still keep an eye on how each of the partners is trending to make sure that we're hitting kind of our goals for the year. Those are really the things I look at. And having been a banker, I certainly use financials as kind of a way, I look at the P&L fairly regularly. And, the balance sheet, we're very simple from a balance sheet standpoint. So I don't have to worry about things because we are fortunate that we are positive, very positive in working capital. But I do focus on expenses and margins and how that all plays out as well.
It's a pretty low on the end user terminal, the end user experience, the subscription. It's a low ARR subscription relative to like enterprise software. And I'm curious if, how you guys manage churn there, because I know you focus on that and I know you do a pretty good job. So if you could just sort of share how you monitor and address issues as they come up.
Yeah, I mean, as we go through churn, I think our biggest challenge is getting folks to upsell existing customers. And this is a little bit just the way we're set up, which is that the people that hunt also do the farming for now. And so there's a bit of an effort to push them to renew at higher rates, which they're not always willing to do because there's a commission tied to renewal. And that's really steady, nice income for them. Whereas the hunting income is a maybe, right? You have to work to get it. So while the commission for hunting is much higher than the commission for farming, the fact that there is a commission for farming means sometimes folks are a little reluctant to push the envelope on renewals. And we've recently done a much better job of surfacing usage data. And this is an area for improvement for us, as I suspect it is for a lot of SaaS companies, which is you've got all this data and now you want to bring it and surface it such that you can apply it to running the business and drill down and apply it to individual customers and get a sense for how valuable the service is to the customer and therefore how much room you have to make sure you're getting properly incentivized for the value you're delivering. And so that's an area that we have to kind of continuously focus on is, okay, who are they? Wow, they're really a heavy user. And what are they paying us? You need to get that rate up. That's ridiculous. They're getting more value than they should be. And so, hey, sales guy, I know you don't want to take the risk of raising their price, but you need to take the risk of raising their price. And I'll try to incentivize you to do that. But those are some of the issues that we kind of deal with when we look at the portfolio.
Well, yeah, you have an all you can eat kind of pricing model in a way.
We do. Yeah.
And it's so trying to get to some kind of hybrid on consumption is almost what you're looking at there.
Yeah, and it's not that I don't want to limit consumption because clearly usage drives retention. If somebody's using the service, it's valuable to them, it's a need to have, and they're not going to go anywhere. But it's more about, well, how many seats did you give them back in the day? And what are they paying us? For instance, if they have a lot of users, this is a debate we have. The sales guys think the more users, the better. And in some ways it helps, but in some ways you're giving the farm away too. So, the ideal way to raise pricing, and which we're working on, is more and more features and upselling naturally and not just showing up and saying, hey, you're going to pay 10% more.
Well, who likes that?
Right? Who wants that? But we have continuously delivered more value because we've expanded the capture network. Even in the US, we're still adding stations and adding, podcasts and things of that sort. So there's always more value being put into the service. It's a matter of communicating that with the existing customers and making sure they're aware of that. But we try to be flexible. We understand that a local food bank is not going to pay us what a Fortune 50 is going to pay us, nor do they need the same amount of services. And so for us, the natural way to kind of divvy up or tier the pricing is, how big of a geographic area do you want to capture in the sense of monitoring, and how many people do you need to do it? Those are the two levers that are really very transparent. Okay, you only need a state versus the whole country or the world. That's different pricing.
Yep, makes sense. From your standpoint, you've been responsible for marketing for a long time.
Yep.
What do you think the role is of marketing in driving opportunity for TVEyes?
It's interesting. When I joined the company 10 years ago, most of the sales were driven by outbound activity by the sales team. And now when I look at it, it's almost 50-50 inbound to outbound. And I suspect with more marketing energy, it would be 75-25, 75 inbound. So that's an area for us to kind of grow. We've taken a very low impact marketing profile in the sense that we're really just focused on kind of search engine optimization and pay-per-clicks and putting up some ads. But there's room to grow in terms of driving more inbound leads. But that necessitates some restructuring to make sure that the sales team can handle those leads efficiently as they come in. So we're at that stage where we're trying to scale, but we need to make some changes in the sales processes to ensure that we can handle the scale. But we're really blessed. We have a huge addressable market. I can't emphasize that enough, because if you look at our current customer base and you look at all of the different verticals that they represent and how many other players are in those verticals, it's a massive addressable base, even with the wholesale partnerships. Because at the end of the day, we're not that expensive. And so for a really big customer, they'll do both. They'll sign up for us and they'll sign up for the wholesale provider because they like our platform. This gets into a little bit of differentiation. We haven't priced it so high that it's an either or. And the platform that's been developed over 20 years, which I can take no credit for, but thanks to our CTO and David Ives, the founder, is a very simple to use platform. People have gotten very married to it, wedded to it. And so they can justify paying us both from that standpoint, which is great. And so when you think of it that way, the addressable market is really massive. I mean, there are 17,000 municipalities in the US, and each of those municipalities for us represents 4 or 5 customers: police, fire, mayor, health, education. There's 5 right there.
Wow, that's awesome.
So it's really, for us, it's about, well, how do we scale that marketing engine? And how do we do it efficiently without running ads on the Super Bowl or anything crazy like that?
Well, that would be fun to do, though.
It would be. It'd be great if I could get there.
But it might be one of those decisions you regret, too. And that's my new favorite question. Dan, if you could revisit a decision of the last few years, what would it be and why?
I mean, everybody says, oh, I only wish I knew then what I know now. And we've been blessed. The business is very stable and has continuously done very well. So we haven't had any crises. And as I sit here today, there's nothing that I see over the horizon the next year that's really going to threaten the business, because it's a resilient business and it's an important information source. It's a need to have. So even if we have a recession or something like that, we're pretty recession proof. And because if there's a crisis, actually, people need to know what the heck is being said on the news. That said, I mean, if I could go back, I'd move faster on certain things, evolving the service, focusing on inbound. I mean, those are the things, if I could have done, I would have done sooner. But I'm doing them now. It's just, boy, I wish I could have done this 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Where would we be?
I think that's maybe one of the more consistent responses to the question. It's like the healthy decisions I'm making today, I wish I'd made a year or 2 ago, right?
Yep.
Well, hey,
I know it's not very exciting and dramatic, but that's really the truth.
But I think that's a lesson, when you have to make a decision and you put it off and it's healthy for the business and you don't do it anyway, and you don't die on that hill. Sometimes you have to go do it. So maybe that's the insight that's available here. Hey, Dan, Thank you so much for being on the podcast. If people want to
already,
yeah, your time's up, man. If people want to reach you and learn more about TVEyes, how can they do that?
So they can drop me an email at dmiles@tveyes.com and just reference the podcast in terms of how they heard about us.
Fabulous. And I'm on LinkedIn/Ken Lempit. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. And once again, Dan Miles, TVEyes, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ken. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.